And I'm proud to say that I haven't seen a number of 31 participants in our meetings in recent weeks on Zoom, and it's obviously why, and it's not because you came to listen to me. Jim, over to you. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. I was thinking, I'm actually going to enlarge what I said I was going to talk about. I said I was going to talk about retirement. I think I want to shoot a little broader that, and I got thinking about it. I want to talk about sort of revisioning the whole idea of vocation in the future. And I want to begin by talking about sort of the world our grandchildren are going to, or rather my grandchildren are going to live in. I'm 74 years old. I've got 5 grandchildren. They're 12, 11, 10, 9, and 8. They're stair-stepped all the way down. And they're going to live in a world a lot different than the one that I live in. I'm trying to figure out how to share this screen. Vanu taught me how to do that, but I have lost the share the screen deal. Anyway, I'll just talk you through it.
Down on the bottom of your screen, Jim, it should say share screen, and it's green.
Let me see. Oh yeah. Okay, let me see if I can put some something up here that well, I don't see it. Anyway, I'll just talk you through it. My grandchildren at least, are going to live in a way different world than the one that I've lived in. And I guess every generation has been the same. There's a principle in science that's called social phase change that scientists talk about how a molecule will encounter something else, and suddenly it will become very, very different. It will look different. It will have a different form. It will have different traits. It will follow different rules. For example, a good example is water and ice. They're basically the same, and yet the molecules change. And that's called social phase change. For example, you can control water with pipes and boats, but if it becomes ice, then it tends to sink. It tends to crack and open pipes and sink ships. And we've had lots of phase changes in the history of the world. A good example is the Renaissance, from the 14th to the 16th century. The idea of movable type that came in 1440, where Gutenberg in Germany invented this, and before that, paper, and suddenly knowledge just exploded, and the world was changed. It was not the same world that people had lived in. Things that were inaccessible were suddenly accessible. Things that were unaffordable were suddenly affordable. The modern age is an even better illustration, which is basically the 17th through the 20th centuries. You had the scientific revolution in the 17th century, that the whole scientific method where you have a hypothesis and then a test and then a proof, and then you either have a general theory or you have a change in the hypothesis and you do it again. Change the world. Just change the world. Everything was different after that. The agricultural revolution took place in the 17th century, and you had mechanization, and all of a sudden tremendous productivity that had never been thought of before. A century later, the 18th century, you had the industrial revolution, where you had assembly lines and machines, and there were a lot of bad things that happened from that, child labor and things like that. But suddenly goods were cheaper, and there were healthcare advances, and there was that public education. Public education is only about 300 years old. The idea that everybody ought to get an education, people were living longer as a result of that. The world changed as a result of the Industrial Revolution. And then in the 20th century, you had the technological revolution, and the world was changed. 1900, the radio. 1950, you can draw a line through history at 1950, the television. Suddenly you have visual learners, not so much books. In 1986, or rather, right, 1980, you have the beginning of CNN and 24-hour news. That changed everything. And we live in a 24-hour news cycle because of that. Then in 1983, you have the beginning of the internet. And everything changed. You have now free public utilities, Google and Facebook and Apple and things like that. But they're trade-offs. Whenever you use those things, you've got a cookie, and suddenly you're exchanging your data for being able to use that source. And it changed the world. Suddenly your inbox is filled with things that, you did a search engine and you look for something, and all of a sudden there's an advertisement about that in your inbox. Your world has changed. And they didn't function the way companies had functioned before, and no profits and no taxes and no dividends. And all of a sudden you've got antitrust problems, and you've got cyber crime. I don't know if you're aware of what's happening, the cyber crime, that the thefts, the scams, the ransomware that is attacking all of our institutions. And the only way to settle it is you give them a Bitcoin or multiple Bitcoins to pay them off. Even the FBI will tell you that's just the world change. It's not the same world, and things happen so quickly. These social phase changes happen so quickly that, and the next one, I don't know if you've seen today's Wall Street Journal. But there's a section in the Wall Street Journal today about AI, about artificial intelligence. It's going to change the world. We hadn't seen anything yet. The algorithms are affecting farming and Bitcoins and the stock market, and it's going to change everything. Bill Gates has predicted that we're going to experience the first intergenerational economic transformation in human history. That means it's going to affect every generation. And it's going to affect employment. Our grandchildren are not going to have the kind of jobs that we have had in the past. You're going to see huge downsizing because of robots, because of artificial intelligence that affects everything. There's going to be a mind behind the mind. And the problem is, what are going to be the values? It may not be vocation at all. All the repetitive jobs, even truck driving, is going to go by the way. In the Wall Street Journal today, it said, how would you like to have an AI be your lawyer, or your doctor, or your engineer, or your banker, or your teacher? Why can't computers do that better? And suddenly things that we hadn't thought much about or had a lot of respect for, they may still be around. I do a little consulting with businesses, and I can go into any business and I can tell there are 3 different kinds of employees in every business. They're what I call the bringers. They're the rainmakers. They bring things in. They walk the business in, and they're always paid the most. Then they're the grinders, the people that just kind of grind out business. And they're going to be the ones who lose the jobs for sure. And they're the binders, the people that hold on to clients and create esprit de corps in the work. They have emotional intelligence, communication skills, and they're creative thinkers, and they're relational resolvers and problem solvers. And, I don't know how you're going to do without those kind of folks. But there may be new professions that don't exist today. For example, 200 years ago, it was pretty much, work was considered a curse. If you know anything about the gentry in Europe, particularly, and that's my dog barking incidentally. If you know anything about England, the gentry didn't work. And then the South before the Civil War, there was a whole group of people that, they didn't get their hands dirty, That work was kind of a bad thing. Today, work is, it's a curse not to have a job. That may change. We may learn that there's social value in things that we've never paid people for. For example, parenting. Who knows? There may really be a guaranteed national income because there'll be so many people that won't be needed in the workforce. Incidentally, that wasn't introduced by Andrew Yang. That was introduced by Daniel Patrick Moynihan. Moynihan in 1973, he introduced that idea. So the world our grandchildren are going to live in is going to be very, very different. It's going to be radically different. And AI is going to change our world. And we need to pivot and start thinking that way and talking to our grandchildren about what they can do. I think it's critically important to be what I call a binder, because I think there's always going to be room for those kind of people. Okay, that's one thing about our grandchildren. Then I want to talk about us, about the whole notion of retirement. I kind of think that the notion of retirement is, we count it as a noun. In fact, it's in your dictionary as a noun. And it's about withdrawal. It's about removal. It's about the past. And in our society, it's related to a lot of D's. Decline, disease, dependency, depression, decrepitness. I think we ought to think about it, our retirement years as a verb, is something you do, as a future orientation. When people tell me they're going to retire, I ask them, what are you retiring to? We tend to think about what we're retiring from. We don't think about what we're retiring to. And in our culture, we don't have a lot of illustrations for how to think about it. For example, the only religion in the world that talks about retirement, has a kind of a theology of retirement, is Hinduism. You may want to Google the 4 stages of life in Hinduism. It's fascinating. You got the younger age where you're learning to get ready for a career, and then you've got your career years, and then the retirement years, and then the end after 72, which I'm beyond that. It's relinquishment and poverty and being a hermit and that sort of thing. There's actually for the Judeo-Christian religions, for Islam and Christianity and Judaism. You know, Abraham was drawing retirement in Ur of Chaldea when God called him. So we don't have a theology of retirement. And for us, we think, you know, it all started with Franklin Delano Roosevelt in 1935, Social Security Act. That's not true. It started with Otto von Bismarck in 1889. Germany was having a terrible depression and the unemployment was terrible. And he came out with this idea of retirement at 65. And basically Roosevelt picked up on that. Of course, men at that time lived to be 59 and women lived to be 63. So the retirement at 65 sounded pretty good. George Bernard Shaw talks about retirement as a perpetual holiday, and he called it hell. That's sort of the way I think about it, to be honest with you. I don't know if you've ever seen the movie About Schmidt. You need to look for them. That is a funny, hilarious movie. Jack Nicholson, his wife dies, he retires, and I mean, his life is a disaster. It's a nightmare. He is bored, he's useless, he's needy, he's lonely, and he ends up doing very inappropriate things. I'm not saying we shouldn't downshift, but the idea of this whole idea of doing nothing, that is very, you know, I don't know where we get that. But the problem is we don't have a plan. Retirement is the only age in our lives that we never planned for. We do a better job of planning for vacations than we do planning our retirement. I'm not talking about our money. We do plan about our finances, but we don't think about what will I do? And it's the most difficult transition in life, and yet we don't think about it. And so we end up dealing with a lot of negative emotions, grief, the loss of identity and influence, and
Psalm 2.
Yes, can you hear me? Have I lost?
Are you there?
Okay. Anyway, and depression, a lot of people experience terrible depression. In fact, you know, when I first retired, I went into a siege of depression. I couldn't see anything good I'd ever done. All I could see was shortcomings and failures. People feel isolated. It's the first time in their lives that they hadn't had a tribe. You've always belonged to a group, and now all of a sudden you're dislocated. And you start thinking, why am I here? And what am I going to do with the rest of my life? We need to think about that and frame that a little more intelligently than we're trained to do. When I turned 40, I had a psychiatrist friend who sent me a book, and I just hated it. It was by a guy named Paul Tournier, who is a psychiatrist. It was a book called Learning to Grow Old. Hey, this guy sent me, I'm 40. This guy sent me a book on learning to grow old, and I wouldn't read it. I just said, man, that is depressing. I don't want to think about that. Finally got around to reading it, and it was brilliant. It was absolutely, it turned my life, my whole thinking around. He said conventional retirement is actually perpetual unemployment neurosis, is what he called it. And he said, somewhere in your middle years, which is why this guy sent me the book, he said, you need to develop what he called a second career. And it's not a job. A job is being a greeter at Walmart, okay? It's not a hobby. You lose your hobby if you try to, a career, something that is at the crosshairs of your sense of purpose in life, why you exist, something that you get excited about. Maybe you get remuneration for it, and maybe you don't, but it becomes and you start test driving this so that you're ready for your future. Great example of that is a guy in our own club, Wayne Shopper. When he retired from the school business, he didn't retire. He continued to do huge work for Spring Branch Independent School District, but he also did some work where he got paid as a consultant, and he gave the money to his church, incidentally. So it's not about remuneration. Maybe you do it as a volunteer. Maybe you do it as you get paid for doing it. But the important thing is you do something with your life. You're just not wasting away. One of my favorite writers is a guy named David Brooks. He writes for the New York Times. He writes books too. He's what they used to call their token conservative. Not sure how conservative he is, but I love David Brooks. And he wrote a book a few years ago called The Road to Character. And in the introduction of that book, he talks about how for the first half of our life, we spend ourselves trying to build our resumes. We build our resume virtues. You know, all that stuff you put in the newspaper when you die, you know, all that, I did this and I did, you know, all that, which I don't read. But, you know, the first half of our life, that's really important to us. He said the second half of your life, you need to work on your eulogy virtues. And what he means by that is the things that people say to your family after the funeral about what you did for them and how you stood beside them and the difference you made and that sort of, and that's what I'm talking about. You know, do we need to downshift? Yeah, sure. Makes all the sense in the world. But we don't need to do nothing. We need to do something that leaves the world a better place, that makes a difference, that where we use the gifts that we have for as long as we're in the world, as long as we've got the energy to get up and go. So I guess I want to leave you with some challenges. And I guess I'll leave you with 5 challenges. One is, I think it's a good idea to do what I call a lifespan calculation, where you think about how long you expect to live. Incidentally, there's a website you can look. In fact, there are a bunch of websites. You know, the one that comes to mind is called Death Clock. You put in all this information, and it calculates when the day of your death, which is pretty scary. Then you back that up and you say, what about how many quality years am I likely to have? What is my QTR, quality time remaining, and then how do I want to use the time that I've got? That's a kind of sounds grim, but why wouldn't you do that? Why wouldn't you take a look? Here's the time I've got remaining. How do I want to use this time? Second thing I think is important that most of us do is, this is the one thing we do about retirement, I think, is the financial calculation. I think in the future, these defined benefit plans are kaput. I don't know if you read the other day that Exxon is no longer going to help to fund the 401ks for its employees. The day of defined benefits and all that sort of thing is gone. And even AARP says a third of the baby boomers are going to work. I think probably more than that. Personally, I think there's too much hype about the money part of it. I have a friend whose name is Dick Adams, who retired maybe 10 years ago. I heard he was going to retire, and I called him, and I knew him well enough to ask him. I said, tell me what the number is. You know, what percentage of your money can you take down every year in order to make it, and that sort of thing. Is it 4% or is it 3%? You know, is it 5%? And he said, Jim, you don't need to worry about money. I said, well, what do you mean? He said, you'll have enough money. I said, well, what do you know that I don't know? He said, you'll have enough money. I said, well, how do you know that? He said, because it'll be all you have, and you'll make it work. And that has really helped me. that has helped me more than anybody, any financial planners out, because that's really the truth. You may have to adjust your lifestyle some. You may not leave as much to your kids, whatever. Okay. I'm not saying we shouldn't be concerned about it. I'm a believer in doing some real hard work, though, beyond the finances. For example, what is your mission in life? I think everybody needs a personal mission statement. This is why I exist. This is what I'm doing with my life. It's a really hard thing to do that. I wrote mine for the first time in 1996. And I hadn't lived in Houston much, but a couple of years when I wrote it. And I revised it after I retired. But I look at it once a week. And this is why, how am I doing accomplishing my mission? I think another wonderful thing to do, which not many people do, but I think is a wonderful thing to do, is having a family mission statement. This is what our family is about. This is who we are as a family. This is what we're doing as a family. So it's an intelligent thing to do. For one thing, it'll tell you where you ought to spend your money. What the family's values are, and then having goals for life. I don't mean short-term goals. I mean, what do you want to be willing to say about yourself before you're willing to die? I don't even know if you remember Covey, Stephen Covey, the business guy. One of his principles was you begin with the end in mind. And I really believe in that. I think you need a crystal clear understanding of what you're doing, not just with your finances, but with your whole life. Most of us only have goals in a couple of areas, professional and financial. What about your spirituality? What about your integrity? What about your health? What about your intellect? What about simplicity? What about your family? What about your friends? What about usefulness? I have goals in all those areas and finances. And I've got goals for my life. And then I've got goals for the next 5 years. I'm in the third year of a 5-year cycle. And this is in other words, I can't get to the end right now, but here's what I'm going to be doing in the next 5 years. Here's what I'm going to be doing the next year in order to drive me in the direction of I think that's why people have midlife crises, is they wake up one day and they've only focused on their profession and their finance, and there's just huge frustration with the rest of their lives. And it's because they haven't given attention to the rest of their lives. And I think that's incredibly important to do. So I think so I would encourage you to think about, how long am I going to be around? How are my finances? What's my mission in life? Maybe what's my family's mission? Wouldn't it be cool to have that above your dinner table, where this is what we're doing. How are we doing with our mission? How are we, that would tell you how to spend your time, how to spend your money. Working on a statement like that is, I think, really important. Okay, my final arguments, closing arguments, as with a lawyer. Retirement is not the end of the book. It's the end of a chapter. And there's another chapter ahead. And I think we need to work on how to write that chapter well. There's an American writer by the name of Richard Bach who used to write some pretty well-known books. And he used to say the real test of whether or not you fulfilled your mission on earth is whether or not you're still breathing. If you're still breathing, it ain't over. And there's something you have to do. And I like what Malcolm X said, the civil rights activist. He said, you can rest when you're dead. Right now, you got work to do. Anyway, that's if any of you are interested in documents that can help you write a personal mission statement or a family mission statement or goals for life, I've got tools that I can send you, documents that I use with people, and you can spend some time with it. I've also got one on how to network to interview for a job, because I used to call it my 90 days Jim Jackson guaranteed to find the job of your dreams thing. Anyway, a lot of people, the way you find a job today is not on the internet. You find it through networking, and networking is hard work, but it works. Okay, that's all I got to say. Anybody got a question?
Yes, I have a question. Real easy one, I think. If that wasn't thought-provoking at least, and quite mind-blowing at most, I think we all got a lot to think about. What do you think about lowering the birth rate?
Well, you know, I think it's a problem everywhere. There've been, you know, sustainability studies that have recently done that say that we can sustain the kind of population that we've got and how it's exploding. I don't know how that works, but I had a doctor one time when our second child was born. Well, let me back up. I think that one of the problems is not that we have too many people. I think the problem is the wrong people are having children. You know, we tend to think about children in terms of money. When you got a big farm to run, you need lots of children. It's an economic advantage. Today, it's an economic disadvantage because it's going to cost you hundreds of thousands of dollars to get them educated and out the door. So we tend to think about children in terms of money. We need to think about them in terms of how many people are we willing to invest in and nurture and raise. And that's the real key. The problem is people just bringing children in the world without any thought of of raising them. Everybody doesn't need their own room. I mean, and I'm not sure we need the money to send everybody to college. I mean, nobody sent me to college. I mean, I guarantee you in our Rotary Club, you got a lot of people who sent themselves to college. So, you know, it's not about money. But I do think that if we just multiply people that really don't are never nurtured. I have a cousin who used to be a prison warden, and I asked him one time, how do you rehabilitate criminals? He said, well, Jim, the problem is some of them were never habilitated. You can't rehabilitate somebody that was never habilitated. And I think that's kind of at the core. That's one of the, so it's not just about birth rate. It's about, we're not thinking about this. That's just one person's opinion.
I have a comment and a question.
Yeah.
And interesting you said about cyber threats. In 2020, right now, this year, by the end of the year, it'll be about $1.6 trillion of theft, cybercrime. 2021 is going to be about 4 years. They're going to predict a $6 trillion, which is going to be a year, which is going to be the largest transfer of wealth, and that being theft. And so kind of like going to my question somewhat is, what do you see in the future as far as faith and religion? Where's that going to be in the future? Because you had mentioned about,
I think that that's going to be in trouble. I can't really speak about anything but Christianity, because it's the only thing I know a lot about. Mm-hmm. But I think that the church is going to be in trouble. And I think probably other religions will as well. But cyber theft is going on. Let me tell you, it's happening right now. There's been theft of intellectual property that they had to pay for with Bitcoins at Rice, mm-hmm. at University of Houston, at University of University of Texas, A&M, churches, banks, financial institutions. It's everywhere. It's unbelievable what's going on, and AI is going to make it worse.
Yes, the criminals are already using AI, and so that's what business have to really consider using AI and defending them. Already. That's right. They only get smarter. I mean, 60% of business, 75% of small business are been hit by cybercrime in the past year. Small medium business, and 60% of them go out of business in the next 6 months. So it's a real threat. So thank you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
You mentioned Covey's book, Stephen Covey. Yeah. Uh-huh. It will have a big impact on your life if you'll pick that book up and read it. It is an outstanding book.
Yeah, I agree with you. I attended his first time he ever put that on. I was in the room. I was totally blown away. Of course, he wrote a lot of books, but the first one, the Anchor one, is the one you're talking about, and I agree. And thank you.
He came to Spring Branch and talked to all administrators and brought his books, and we really learned a lot.
Any other questions for Jim?
Jim?
I use.
Yeah, Annie, go ahead.
Yeah, well, yeah, Jim?
Yes.
Yes, at this, the stage you are talking about, the stage of life, you touch some on the wealth, as to how much wealth I have. And there is a philosophy, the only wealth which matters at this stage in life is the one I take with me. And that wealth is how much I do in terms of donation to the less advantaged. Because in Hinduism, that's known as karma, which goes with me.
Yeah.
All other wealth stays here.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, and you can find that, as I say, you can Google the 4 stages of life in Hinduism. I think it's fascinating. I think it's it's I think it's transferable to any religion. I think it's wonderful.
Lindsay Kroll had a question.
On a very simplistic fashion, there was a book by Buford called Halftime, which I thought was very helpful maybe 20 years ago when I read it. And I wondered what your thoughts of that one are.
Yeah, that had a huge impact on a lot of people, and still would if it. As I say, I'm convinced that most people have two goals. They have financial goals and they have professional goals, and a lot of people wake up at halftime and they say, "I've gotten a long way beyond what I ever thought I would do, and this isn't it." And so, a lot of times they try to fix that by getting a divorce and marrying somebody else that looks younger, or in some kind of superficial way, rather than looking deeply at their life. And what's really happening is that the parts of them which they've ignored are now shouting at them. And they have to stop and listen. And what that book is about how you stop and listen and refocus your life more broadly. And that's basically what I'm saying. I think Buford's book is the beginning of. In fact, I think that the time to do that is not when you're facing retirement, but in middle age. That's when you adjust your vision.
Mary Ann, you had a question.
Yes, Jim, thank you very much. And I'd like to know, are you considering writing a book on the last chapter?
Well, I've thought about it. I've helped several people sort of figure out what's next, and I thought about putting together some of those resources, but I hadn't done it. I'm writing a book now on change and how people change and why they don't change and what causes change and how to go about it and that sort of thing. I'm writing a book about that right now, but maybe one day.
I have a question. How can we get in touch with you if we want to access some of your tools?
Let me put my email in the chat thing, and let me see how to do that.
Tell us. It's easier.
Go down to chat.
Yeah. Okay. Hold on.
I don't even know where the chat is on this thing.
Well, we can get it disseminated, Jim, if you want to just send it.
Okay, I just sent it. It's Jim at Equip3, EQUIP, and the numeral 3.com. Jim at EQUIP3.com. And I'm happy to send you the stuff that, whatever you want. And what I suggested was how to write a personal mission statement, how to write a family mission statement if you've got a nuclear family, how to write goals for life, which I think is the most important thing. And if you're interested, I'll send you something on how to network and interview for a job.
Okay, excellent.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Jim, for that. I think all of us have a lot to think about and evaluate introspectively as a result of your comments.